Okay, folks. So I am thinking of this as theory crafting. I don't know that it necessarily fits that definition completely. I was still figuring out the talents for Fire Mage, and I was swapping out PvP talents, and I noticed my mind was going down a rabbit hole. So I thought, well, that might be helpful in kind of explaining why I was kind of what I was doing for those of you maybe a little newer to the game, maybe you're newer to PvP, what have you. So this may or may not be helpful to you depending on your experience in the game. I had taken Netherwind armor to start with after everything reset from the pre-patch. And my thinking was it reduces your chance of getting hit by a critical strike by 50%. So my thinking was, okay, I'm a clothy. So the difference between a critical strike or getting hit by a critical strike or avoiding one could be life or death. However, they redesigned combustion for the umpteenth time. And now, not only does it work really simple, it makes it so that everything crits, and per half of your critical strike, your mastery is increased by half of your critical strike. So I swapped it out for Fire Starter. Your Fireball reduces the cooldown of your combustion by 5 seconds, which works well with Tinder. If you have not cast Fireball for 8 seconds, your next Fireball will deal 30% increased damage with a 50% reduced cast time. So my thinking there was, I kept going back and forth. I was like, is that really worth it though? Started going down a rabbit hole. With Netherwind armor, it only reduces chances that you will get hit by a critical strike, and 50% is fairly low with critical strike, quite frankly. My critical strike is 44%, so if that gives you any clue. Now, if you really wanted to get into Theorycrafting, you could sit down and figure out what the average critical strike is, and then figure in where the 15% comes in, and come up with an actual percentage of how often, all of this would work. However, my kind of just briefly thinking about it, my conclusion was that, well, critical strike is chance. It's not a guarantee. It's a chance. Speaking from somebody who's a fire mage, where I need critical strike, I need to get critical strikes as often as possible. There is a pretty wide margin between the times you get a critical strike and the times you don't. As I said, I have 44% critical strike, which is way higher than most classes need to have. And that is in large part because of critical mass, which essentially does what, for purposes of discussion, what molten armor used to do when mages had 3 armors. Frost armor used to increase haste, molten armor used to increase critical strike, and arcane used to increase mastery. And you could use all 3 in all 3 different specs. It didn't matter. Now they've made everything. Now all the armors do just that. They just give you basically a frost shield, just themed to your specialty now. So with critical mass, rather than molten armor used to just simply increase critical strike. Critical mass, you gain 10% more of the critical strike stat from all sources. So 44 is way higher than most. Critical strike generally will be a higher stat because most gear will have critical strike on it. I think I'm safe in saying it's the most prevalent stat. You'll either get most everything. You'll either get like haste and critical strike, mastery and critical strike, or mastery and haste, which are rare pieces, or versatility and critical strike. You get the idea. Critical strike's usually one of your 2 secondary stats on most of your gear. So, you actually have haste and versatility. Yeah. So, and then with the way that gear can upgrade itself now just instantly by chance, that also may mean you may get an additional stat, you may not. You may upgrade your stat, you may not. It just kind of depends. So I was thinking with with Netherwind armor, there's a chance. It's not a guaranteed thing. I have no control over it. And in a PvP setting, I may avoid 1 critical strike and then end up dying to another. So it's not really... It's helpful, but it's not dependable, I think would be the way to say that. So Firestarter, not only does it have synergy with Tinder, which I don't, with 2 charges of Fire Blast and 3 charges of Phoenix Flames, I really don't use Fireball all that often unless I have Combustion up. And with Combustion up, Pyroblast will proc off of itself. Either grant you a charge, what is that called? Hot Streak, there we go. Either grant you a charge of Hot Streak, or actually just proc itself into being instant cast. So this does several things. Keep in mind that anytime you do fire damage, you're going to leave Ignite behind, which is your mastery. So you're going to leave a dot behind, which is going to do damage. You are also as I've so often said, if you can pick a passive that makes an already existing spell better. When I've played around with this a little bit, just in with war mode turned on, just messing around on a training dummy, doing the world bosses that are out for the WoW anniversary, what have you, and I like Tinder. I swapped Tinder out for Greater Pyroblast because this was taking too long to cast in PvP. And I saw fire mages that had a similar spell, or at least had a similar animation. So I'm guessing it was the same spell. And now I'm kind of not. So for me, it had too long of a cast time. So I said, well, let's look and see if we can't swap it out for something else and just kind of play around. So Tinder seemed like it had promise because I don't typically use Fireball because one, there's no guarantee that it's going to crit, and two, it has basically a 2-second cast. Which, when you have 2 instant cast spells, I have 5 charges of 2 instant cast spells. Pyroblast will generally give you at least 1 charge of Hot Streak. So, in theory, you have 5 charges of Pyroblast. And in a PvP setting, you're going to be moving around, depending on what you're doing. If you're defending a base, if you're assaulting a base, what have you. Very rarely are you allowed to sit there and just completely free cast and nobody is going to do anything. It does happen, depending on the groups. On my Warlock, there are times I can pretty well just stand in one spot and just dot everybody, and nobody seems to really pay any attention to me. So you are leaving a dot behind. It's making a spell I wouldn't otherwise normally use, giving it a little more priority. And it's reducing the cooldown on combustion. So with combustion, I am guaranteed that Fire Blast always critical strikes, and Phoenix Flames always critical strikes. So essentially, each one of these is going to critical strike twice with combustion, because it makes your critical strike chance 100%. And also increases your mastery. So the Ignite dot that you leave behind is going to do more damage than it normally would. So my conclusion, I've kind of trailed off there a bit, was that Netherwind is not guaranteed, is not dependable. I have no control over it. It's more of a defensive spell. That's completely random. It may work, it may not. Firestarter gives me a little more control over what I'm doing. Think about what a mage actually is. Again, kind of on paper. You're not supposed to. Yes, we wear cloth. Which is, of the 4 types of armor, the worst one. However, that is counteracted by the fact that we're supposed to do massive amounts of damage. Same with warlocks. I suppose you could say the same thing for priests. Priests only have shadow as their, shadow and discipline, I suppose, now. Priest is kind of in another category for a variety of reasons. So the idea is that you can do a ton and massive amount of damage. However, the downside is you are going to be easy to kill. So I kind of reasoned that it would be better to be more offensive than defensive. No matter what I do, I'm never going to get to a point where I am invulnerable. I'm always going to die to something. So I want to do as much damage as I can while trying to avoid dying. So Firestarter seemed like it made more sense. It offered synergy with Tinder. It increased my critical strike chance by reducing the cooldown on combustion. It increases mastery, which increases ignites, dot damage. When I get Power Blast, but it works on Flame Strike, which not only does initial damage, but thanks to my talent will also leave behind an AoE, which will do damage as well. So I have options. As long as I get the critical strikes, I have a single target option and I have an AoE option. So that was kind of my thinking. Nether armor does one thing, and it's a random chance that it has a random chance to do something, basically. If you are, say you are in a one-on-one with somebody in PvP, if they never get a critical strike, then this is just kind of wasted. This is just there. And if they do, there's no guarantee that that 15% chance is going to be enough to save you. Anyway, because it doesn't actually say, if I understand critical strike correctly, it just says chance for extra effectiveness on attacks and health. So I've always understood it that when you do get a critical strike, it's a random amount. Whether you're healing, whether it's healing or damage, it's a random amount. It's not like versatility is more clear. It increases things by a percentage. Some mastery effects will increase things by a certain amount, and then the more mastery you have increases that amount. It's not necessarily a percentage, it's just a flat out amount. So while the idea of Nether Wind Armor is nice, and I very well may end up going back to this after I have played around and tried everything out to see how it works. My final decision came down to Firestarter could multitask, as it were, and synergize with other talents and spells and things like that, whereas Nether Wind Armor could not. I guess would be my conclusion to the whole thing. So yeah, so there you go, folks. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful for you. And thank you for watching.